The morning sun, still a bit sleepy, was just starting to peek through the kitchen window, casting long warm stripes across Eleanor Vance's worn linoleum floor. It was her 65th birthday, and she was doing what she always did, making herself a cup of Earl Grey tea. The kettle whistled a cheerful tune, but Eleanor's mood was quietly reflective. 65, a number that felt both significant and utterly ordinary. Before we continue, thank you for joining us for today's story. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. As she reached for her favorite mug, a plain white envelope caught her eye. It lay flat against the oak of her front door, slid neatly under the crack. No stamp, no return address, just her name, Eleanor, written in a slanted, familiar hand that made her heart give a tiny, uncomfortable flutter. It was a handwriting she hadn't seen in 2 decades, a ghost from a life she'd long since packed away. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. Who would send something like this? And why? Her fingers, a little stiff with age, carefully peeled open the flap. Inside was a generic birthday card, the kind you pick up at the grocery store, with watercolor flowers and a bland, wishing you joy message. But beneath that printed sentiment, in that same unsettlingly familiar script, were just a few words. "Happy birthday, Ellie. I never truly left. Check the old cellar." The card slipped from her trembling fingers, landing softly on the braided rug by the door. The kettle, forgotten, began to shriek its protest from the stove. Eleanor didn't move. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Arthur, her husband, he had vanished in 2005, just gone. The police had searched, the news had reported, and eventually, everyone, including Eleanor, had accepted the unbearable silence of his disappearance. 20 years, 2 decades of unanswered questions, of quiet grief, of building a new solitary life. And now this, a few simple words on a cheap card, shattering the fragile calm she had worked so hard to build. The tea was forgotten, the morning light suddenly cold. Before the card, before the silence, before everything changed, there was just life. Eleanor closed her eyes, and the kitchen around her faded, replaced by memories of Willow Creek, Ohio, as it was in 2004. Back then, her world felt small, but in the best possible way. It was a comfortable, predictable rhythm, like a familiar song playing softly in the background. Arthur, her husband, was a high school history teacher. He was a creature of habit, known for his neat stacks of papers, his perfectly timed lunch breaks, and the way he always left exactly 2 sips of coffee in the pot. He wasn't flashy, but he was constant. Eleanor worked part-time at the Willow Creek Public Library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and the quiet hum of turning pages. Their daughter, Chloe, was in her 2nd year of college, studying environmental science up in Vermont. Her calls, full of new ideas and passionate debates, were always a highlight of Eleanor's week. Evenings were the best. After dinner, Arthur would grade papers at the kitchen table, and Eleanor would settle into her armchair with a mystery novel. They didn't need constant conversation. Sometimes, a shared glance, a small smile, or a quiet joke, only they understood, was enough. There were no grand romantic gestures in their marriage, no dramatic declarations of love. Instead, there was a steady, comforting presence, a feeling of being truly seen, truly known. Eleanor remembered the simple rituals: Friday night pizza from Sal's, half mushroom and black olive for her, plain cheese for him. Arthur always picked the movie, usually something with spies, and Eleanor almost always fell asleep halfway through. He'd nudge her awake when the credits rolled, saying, "You missed the best part," just like he always did. Sundays meant a walk to the farmer's market, hand in hand, Arthur always carrying the bags. Their talks were about the weather, neighborhood gossip, small things, but Eleanor never felt bored. She felt safe, held, like the world could shift around them. But they, Arthur and she, would remain the same. She believed they understood each other, that their life was a shared, unfolding story, written together, page by quiet page. Looking back, Eleanor could pinpoint the exact moment the first crack appeared. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, unsettling whisper. It was the evening of their 24th wedding anniversary, September 12, 2004. She remembered circling the date, in red ink, on the kitchen calendar, months in advance. She'd even made reservations at that cozy Italian place downtown, the one with the checkered tablecloths, where they'd celebrated their 10th and 15th. Eleanor had taken extra care that evening. She'd pulled out the blue dress Arthur once said made her eyes look like the summer sky. She'd even put on a touch of lipstick, something she rarely bothered with anymore. Arthur wasn't home when she got ready. She figured he was picking up a small gift, maybe a bouquet of her favorite daisies. She set her phone on the windowsill and waited, a pleasant anticipation fluttering in her chest. 6 o'clock came and went, then 6:30. At 7, the restaurant called, politely asking if they were still coming. Eleanor tried Arthur's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. By 8, she was still sitting on the edge of their bed, fully dressed, makeup on, heels still pinching her feet, staring at the front door as if willing it to open. It wasn't panic she felt, not yet. It was more like a slow, spreading confusion, a dull ache in her chest. Arthur was many things, but he wasn't forgetful. He remembered birthdays, library due dates, even when the milk was about to expire. It was part of his charm, his predictable nature. So how could he forget this? When he finally walked in at 9:15, he looked surprised to see her in her dress. "Oh," he said, pausing in the doorway. "You're still up." Eleanor couldn't speak. A lump had formed in her throat, making it impossible to swallow. "I had a meeting," he continued, shrugging off his jacket. "Parent trouble. The Miller kid's mother just wouldn't leave. I lost track of time. No apology, just that," as if it explained everything. Eleanor looked at him, truly looked. His tie was loose, his shirt a bit wrinkled, and there was a faint coffee stain near the hem. He seemed exhausted, completely unaware of the disappointment sitting in front of him. "I made reservations," she finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Our anniversary." He blinked. "That's today?" That was the moment. Something shifted inside her, not between them, not yet. It was like a tiny thread had been pulled loose, a stitch coming undone. Nothing snapped, nothing tore, but she felt it. He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge. "I can make us some eggs," he offered. Eggs, on their anniversary. Eleanor almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Instead, she just nodded slowly, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried quietly into a towel so he wouldn't hear. She told herself it was a one-time oversight, a sign of stress, but deep down, she knew it was more. The morning after their forgotten anniversary, a plastic-wrapped bouquet of carnations appeared on the kitchen table. Gas station flowers, Eleanor noted. Not her favorite, and Arthur knew that. Still, it was a gesture, a peace offering. She wanted to be angry, to demand a real apology, but a small voice inside her whispered, "Don't make it a big deal. He's tired. He's human." So, she told herself, it was a one-time thing, a hiccup in their otherwise steady routine. But then came the walks. It started the very next week. Arthur began taking long evening strolls, usually right after dinner, without telling her. He'd say he needed to clear his head, get some steps in, or think about lesson plans for his students. He'd just leave, the front door closing softly behind him, and wouldn't be back for over an hour. At first, Eleanor didn't think much of it. Everyone needed time alone, she reasoned. She actually enjoyed the quiet. She'd light a candle, make a fresh cup of chamomile tea, and read in the living room, the house still and peaceful around her. But then it became a pattern. Every single night, like clockwork. He'd barely speak during dinner, then just slip away. No, back soon. No quick hug, just the soft click of the door. Eleanor started to wonder where he really went. One evening, about 5 minutes after he left, she got into her car and drove the neighborhood loop. She drove slowly, peering under streetlights, passed familiar houses, but she never saw him. No sign of his familiar figure walking, no glimpse of him anywhere. When he came home that night, he looked flushed, a bit sweaty. He said he'd jogged a little. Eleanor wanted to ask more questions, to press him, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, she just said, "Maybe we could walk together tomorrow." He gave her a tight, almost forced smile. "Sure," he said. But the next night, he left even earlier, before she could even finish clearing the dinner plates. That's when the doubt truly began to form. It wasn't enough to accuse him, not enough to panic, but it was a persistent whisper, a cold chill at the back of her mind. Something wasn't right, but she told herself every marriage had quiet seasons. She told herself she was being paranoid, that love was patient and kind. She chose silence, and in doing so, she missed the early cracks forming right beneath her feet. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a slow dimming, like someone was gradually turning down the volume on Arthur. After the forgotten anniversary and the unexplained evening walks, something in him seemed to dull. Or maybe, Eleanor often wondered, it was something in her that began to fade in response. The man who used to sneak her chocolate bars from the grocery store, just because, had become muted. He barely seemed to notice. They used to talk about everything: books they'd read, dreams they held, even their quiet fears about growing older. They'd sit in bed and laugh about new technologies they didn't understand, or the leaky faucet they kept meaning to fix. But now conversations were reduced to logistics. Did you pay the gas bill? There's soup in the fridge. I'll be home late. Nothing more. No jokes, no questions, no warmth. Eleanor remembered one particular morning. She'd gotten up early to make him a real breakfast. Not just toast and coffee. Eggs, exactly how he liked them. Over easy with pepper and a slice of turkey bacon. She even cut some melon and arranged it all on one of the ceramic plates they'd bought years ago on a trip to Asheville. He came downstairs, glanced at the plate, and said, "Thanks," before taking it to the table. No eye contact, no kiss on the cheek, just a flat, tired thank you. He ate in silence, reading the newspaper. Eleanor sat across from him, waiting for something. A smile, a conversation, a moment of connection. None came. When he left for work, she stood in the doorway and watched him walk to the car. He didn't wave, didn't even glance back. She spent that whole day feeling like a stranger in her own home. That summer, he stopped coming to bed at the same time as her. At first, he said he was grading papers late. Then it became couldn't sleep. Eventually, she'd just find him already asleep on the couch when she came downstairs in the morning. Eleanor tried to initiate things. She'd put on the old music they used to dance to in the kitchen. She'd reach for his hand when they were walking to the mailbox. She even suggested a weekend getaway, just the two of them. He gave her a strained, polite smile. "Things are just really hectic right now," he'd say. They were always hectic. Eventually, Eleanor stopped trying. Not out of anger. She wasn't angry. She was simply tired. Tired of reaching across a widening gap and never feeling his hand meet hers. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the invisibility. There's a specific kind of pain in realizing that the person you share a bed with no longer sees you. That you've become part of the furniture, the background noise, a figure in the corner of their life, instead of the center. One Sunday at church, a woman asked Arthur how Eleanor and he were doing. "Same as ever," he replied, without even looking at Eleanor. She smiled and nodded, her practiced role, the smiling, nodding wife. Later that week, Eleanor got a haircut. Nothing drastic, just enough to feel fresh. She came home, put on a new blouse, and made Arthur's favorite chicken casserole for dinner. He didn't notice. He didn't say a word. He just served himself a plate, ate in silence, and then went down to the cellar. That was another thing, the cellar. He started spending more and more time down there. He'd say he was organizing old boxes, but Eleanor rarely heard much movement. Just the sound of the door closing, the light turning on, and then hours of silence. Sometimes she'd go to the top of the stairs and listen. Once, she even called down, "Need help?" He didn't answer. She stood there for what felt like forever, before walking away, quietly, ashamed for even asking. Over time, Eleanor started to shrink. Not physically but emotionally. She stopped talking so much, stopped trying to share her day, stopped planning little surprises. It felt like living with a ghost. Except ghosts don't leave coffee mugs in the sink. They don't fill the laundry basket with socks you still fold. They don't kiss you on the forehead out of habit, only for you to realize the gesture holds no weight anymore. She wasn't just being ignored. She was being erased, piece by piece. And still, she told herself, marriages go through phases. It wasn't until the humiliation came, public and sharp, that Eleanor realized something far deeper was already gone. It was Chloe's college graduation dinner, early June 2005. Chloe had just walked across the stage in her green cap and gown, glowing with pride. Eleanor had cried, of course. Arthur had clapped politely. Eleanor remembered he barely took any photos, claiming he'd forgotten to charge the camera, though she'd reminded him twice the night before. They'd planned a small dinner afterward, just family, and a few of Chloe's friends and professors, at a cozy bistro near campus. Eleanor had worn a soft cream blouse, Chloe's favorite, and brought her a charm bracelet with 4 tiny silver leaves, one for each year of college. Arthur showed up late, only by about 10 minutes, but he looked rushed. He gave Chloe a quick side hug, mumbled something about traffic, and slid into the seat beside her without even looking at Eleanor. Eleanor brushed it off. The night was for Chloe. But everything felt a little off. Arthur kept checking his watch, glancing toward the entrance as if expecting someone else. Eleanor tried to engage him, asking about a book he'd been reading, a student he was mentoring. He gave short answers, polite but distant. His tone was clipped, as if he couldn't spare the energy for full sentences. Then, during dessert, it happened. One of Chloe's professors, Dr. Finch, a kind woman with a gentle voice and a passion for literature, leaned across the table and asked Arthur, "So what does your wife do?" She was looking right at Eleanor. Before Eleanor could open her mouth, Arthur answered, "Oh, she's just the wife." He said it with a chuckle, a little shrug, like it was harmless, like it was a joke everyone would understand. But no one laughed, not even Dr. Finch. She just blinked and gave a tight smile before changing the subject. Eleanor felt the blood rush to her face. She wasn't sure what to do. She glanced at Chloe, who was frowning at her father, then looked at Eleanor, almost apologetically. Eleanor's throat tightened. She pushed her dessert plate slightly away, suddenly nauseated. Arthur didn't notice. The rest of the evening blurred. Conversations buzzed around her, but Eleanor felt like she was under glass, smiling when she was supposed to, nodding, laughing at jokes she didn't hear. Her ears were ringing with those words, "just the wife." She kept replaying it in her head, the tone, the ease, the casual dismissal of the life she had given him, of who she was. She wasn't some stranger. She was the woman who had raised their daughter, who had kept their house running, supported his career, comforted him when he lost his parents, edited every cover letter he'd ever sent. She was the person who had loved him long before any of these people even knew his name. And now, she was just the wife. When the check came, Eleanor reached for it, her hands shaking as she pulled her wallet from her purse. Arthur didn't offer to split it. He just leaned back and said, "You've got this, right?" Like they hadn't just been married for nearly a quarter century. That was the moment something in Eleanor cracked, clean and irreversible. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the words. It was the way he said them, with complete indifference, like she was an accessory to his evening, like she could have been anyone. That night, Eleanor cried in the bathroom of their hotel room, pressing her face into a towel to muffle the sound. He didn't knock, didn't ask if she was okay. He went to bed. Eleanor lay on the cold tile floor for almost an hour, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and trying to remember the last time she'd felt like his partner instead of his placeholder. From that night forward, she stopped trying to prove she mattered to him. because in that moment, she knew she didn't, not to him. And that realization was the beginning of her silent departure, even before he left for good. After Chloe's graduation dinner, something shifted between Eleanor and Arthur that never shifted back. Eleanor stopped asking where he was going in the evenings. She stopped reminding him about their weekly calls with Chloe. She even stopped making coffee for two. It wasn't a fight. There were no slammed doors, no threats, no ultimatums. Just silence, a quiet mutual unraveling. He spent more time downstairs in the cellar, far more than before. Sometimes he'd emerge dusty and distracted, mumbling something about reorganizing boxes. Other times, Eleanor wouldn't even hear him come back up. She started going to bed alone regularly, leaving the hallway light on without knowing if he'd ever come to bed at all. Eventually, she stopped turning the light on. That spring, Eleanor began to feel like a guest in her own home. They still shared the same space, but they passed each other like strangers at a bus stop. She'd be folding laundry in the living room, and he'd step over the clothes basket without saying a word. She'd cook dinner and leave his portion in the microwave. Sometimes he ate it, sometimes he didn't. One afternoon, Eleanor came home from the grocery store and found that Arthur had cleared out the hallway closet. Not all of it, just her things. Her raincoat, her gardening gloves, the scarf Chloe had knit for her last Christmas, all folded and stacked neatly in a cardboard box by the door. When she asked about it, he said flatly, "I needed more space." No apology, no explanation. That was the moment Eleanor knew she was being edged out, piece by piece, room by room. But she didn't argue. She didn't scream. Instead, she walked upstairs, took off her shoes, and sat on the edge of their bed for nearly an hour, staring at the space where his slippers used to be. In early July, Eleanor packed a small bag and drove to Chloe's for the weekend. She told Arthur she needed a break, just some time to think. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't even look up from his crossword puzzle. All he said was, "Okay." Chloe didn't ask too many questions either, but Eleanor could see the worry, the hurt in her eyes. Chloe made up the guest bed without a word, then sat next to Eleanor on the couch with a mug of tea and a blanket. They watched reruns of old shows, neither of them really watching. Eleanor thought they both knew she wasn't going back to the same life, and yet she did return home Sunday night. She opened the front door to find the lights off, the TV still on, and a plate of food left untouched on the counter. Arthur wasn't there. The house was so quiet, it felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. Eleanor stood in the kitchen for a long time, waiting for something, a noise, a door creak, a voice. But nothing came. Then came the morning that finally shattered the illusion that this was still a marriage. It was a Tuesday, June 21st. Eleanor remembered because it was the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, though it ended up feeling like the darkest. Arthur said he was heading to the store to get milk. Eleanor barely looked up from her gardening gloves as she nodded. He left the door half open behind him. Eleanor finished trimming her houseplants, wiped down the counter, and waited for the sound of the car returning. It never did. By evening, Eleanor was pacing. By midnight, she called his phone, straight to voicemail. She left one message, then another, then 5 more. By morning, she reported him missing. His wallet was found 2 days later in the front seat of his car, parked off a dirt road an hour north. The keys were still in the ignition. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, no witnesses. The police said it looked like suicide. He may have walked into the river. They told her sometimes people choose remote spots for privacy. But he left no note, no warning, no goodbye. Just a toothbrush in the bathroom, a pair of shoes by the back door, and an empty bed that would stay that way for years. Everyone assumed Eleanor was done, that she'd move on, sell the house, rebuild, heal. But she didn't. Because she wasn't angry. She wasn't even broken. She was hollow, quietly shattered. And that was somehow worse. After Arthur vanished, time stopped meaning anything. The first few weeks were a blur of questions, sympathy, and casseroles. People Eleanor hadn't spoken to in years sent cards. Chloe flew in from college and stayed for a while, her young face etched with a worry that mirrored Eleanor's own. The neighbors mowed her lawn without asking. Church ladies dropped off tuna noodle bakes and peach cobblers with handwritten prayers taped to the foil lids. But by the second month, the calls slowed down. By the third, people stopped asking for updates. "You'll get through this," they'd say. Or worse, "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise." No one says that out loud to a widow. But Eleanor wasn't a widow, not technically. She was something else, something harder to define. A wife with no husband, a life on pause, a question with no answer. Eleanor didn't have a funeral, not right away. For months, she refused to believe he was gone. Her brain kept twisting logic into knots. Maybe he'd had a breakdown. Maybe he was in a hospital with amnesia. Maybe he'd run off and regretted it. Every time the phone rang, a tiny part of her thought it would be him, explaining, apologizing, coming home. But the phone only ever brought bills, telemarketers, or worse, silence. Eventually, Eleanor gave in to the pressure. They held a memorial. No body, just a framed photo of Arthur from their last vacation in the Smoky Mountains, standing on a trail, waving, smiling, like nothing was wrong. Eleanor stood beside that picture and shook hands with people who told her how strong she was. She didn't remember anything she said. She just remembered the weight of her black dress and how Chloe gripped her hand so hard it left crescent marks on her skin. After the service, Eleanor went home and crawled into bed with all her clothes still on. She stared at the ceiling fan and listened to it click, click, click as it turned, hypnotizing her into stillness. She stopped answering the door, stopped checking the mail, stopped going to the grocery store. Her fridge filled with spoiled leftovers and expired yogurt. She survived on saltines, canned peaches, and black tea. Sometimes she didn't eat at all. She let the garden go. The weeds grew wild, creeping over the stone path they'd laid together years ago. She watched them swallow the flowers, one by one from the kitchen window, too tired to stop them. Years turned into decades. Eleanor's home, once a place of comfort, now felt haunted by Arthur's absence. At night, she'd sit in his old armchair by the fireplace, clutching one of his worn sweatshirts, like it might still carry his scent. It didn't. It smelled like dust and fabric softener. Still, she held it. Sometimes she spoke to it, asking questions no one could answer. Why did you go? Did you hate me? Did I miss something? The house groaned and settled around her, as if it had its own grief to bear. Worst of all was the cellar. Eleanor avoided it like it was truly haunted. That door stayed shut for months, sometimes for a year at a time. She told herself it was just storage, just clutter, just shadows. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something lived down there. Not Arthur, not literally, but the version of him she could never reach. The answers, the truth, his absence filled that space like a thick fog. The one time she did try to go down, she only made it 3 steps before she turned back. The air was too heavy, the silence too loud. By the time the first anniversary of his disappearance arrived, Eleanor hadn't stepped out of the house in weeks. Her clothes hung off her. Her reflection in the hallway mirror looked like a stranger, pale, tired, older than she remembered being. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with a single candle lit. She poured herself a glass of wine and toasted the empty chair across from her. "Happy anniversary," she whispered, her voice cracking on the second word. Then she blew out the candle. And for a moment, she considered blowing out everything else too. She didn't, not because she was strong, but because she was too numb to move. She had reached the bottom, and it wasn't fire or chaos or screaming. It was quiet. It was the kind of silence you can't fill with music or prayer or casseroles. It was the silence of knowing you were never really seen. And now there was no one left to see you. Eleanor didn't know it then, but something in her had already started to shift, very slowly, quietly. In that pit of silence, a seed had been planted, and years later, It would bloom with a single line in a birthday card that would change everything. The card arrived on the morning of her 65th birthday, slipped under the door like a secret no one wanted to deliver in person. By then, life had resumed. Not the life Eleanor once had, but a quieter version. She spent her days gardening, reading, avoiding the rooms that still echoed with Arthur's ghost. She didn't expect much from birthdays anymore. Just a call from Chloe, maybe a slice of cake if she remembered to bake one. That morning, Eleanor was in the kitchen making tea when she saw the envelope on the floor. No stamp, no address, just her name, Eleanor, written in handwriting she hadn't seen in 20 years. She stood frozen, staring at it for so long, the kettle began to shriek behind her. The whistle jolted her, but her eyes stayed locked on the envelope. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up, slowly peeling it open like it might explode. Inside was a birthday card, generic pastel, cheap, but the words inside made her knees buckle. "Happy birthday, Ellie. I never truly left. Check the old cellar." Eleanor dropped the card, not because she was afraid, not exactly, but because the room felt like it had tilted sideways, like gravity had changed without warning. She had spent 2 decades believing Arthur was dead, 20 years imagining his final moments, picturing a river, a body lost to current and time. 20 years building closure out of silence. And now this, the handwriting was unmistakable. He always wrote his capital A's with a dramatic loop, and made his lowercase r's like tiny backward hooks. Eleanor used to tease him about it when he signed Christmas cards. There it was again, every letter perfect, every curve an accusation. She clutched the edge of the counter, trying to steady her breath. She thought of every rational explanation. A sick joke, a forgery, maybe Chloe trying to push her into closure with some elaborate intervention. But no one else knew Arthur's handwriting like she did. And no one else knew the truth about what they never found in that cellar. Eleanor had avoided that space for years. She couldn't bring herself to sort through his boxes, couldn't stomach the memories crammed between dusty photo albums and cracked VHS tapes. The cellar was a graveyard, and she had let it stay that way. But now it was calling to her. She grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, her hand trembling. She forced her feet toward the cellar door. The knob felt cold, unfamiliar. She flicked on the switch at the top of the stairs, but the overhead bulb had long since burned out. The steps groaned beneath her weight as she slowly descended. When she reached the bottom, the air was stale and still. Her flashlight beam skimmed over old furniture, draped in yellowing sheets, stacked boxes, labeled Xmas and Chloe's school stuff. Nothing had moved in years, except there. In the far corner of the room, near the old furnace, was a patch of wall that looked just slightly off. A bit cleaner, a little too smooth. Eleanor approached slowly, her heart pounding in her throat. The flashlight flickered. She slapped it, muttered a quiet curse, then pointed it back at the wall. She reached out and ran her fingers along the paneling, feeling a seam, a thin, barely visible crack. She pushed. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a soft pop, the panel gave way. A hidden door. Eleanor's breath caught. Behind the hidden panel was a narrow cavity, not big enough to be a room, but deep enough to hold something. Eleanor reached inside and pulled out a dusty cardboard box. It was heavier than it looked. She carried it to the center of the cellar, setting it down on an old, sheet-draped trunk. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside were files, stacks of letters, and thick envelopes of photographs. None of them were hers. Eleanor's flashlight beam danced over the contents. There were photos of Arthur with unfamiliar people, a woman she didn't recognize, smiling beside him in a park, kissing his cheek at a beachside cafe. Children, too, a boy and a girl. They looked to be about 8 and 10 years old, with Arthur's distinctive nose and the same crinkle around their eyes when they smiled. Eleanor's breath hitched. She picked up a driver's license. It was Arthur's face, unmistakably his, but the name was different. Adam Vance. The address listed was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Below that, receipts from places he'd never told her he'd been, concert tickets, restaurant bills, airline tickets to cities she'd never visited. A small key labeled Storage Unit 14B. She sat down hard on the cold concrete floor, the box in her lap shaking. He hadn't died. He hadn't disappeared. He had started over without her. The grief she thought she had buried 2 decades ago roared back. But this time, it was laced with something new, something searing, betrayal. Her tears burned, not from sadness, but from a hot, blistering rage, from shame, from the hollow realization that she had mourned a man who had simply walked away and kept walking. For 20 years, Eleanor had lived in the ruins of a story that wasn't even true. She had imagined his final moments, pictured a river, a body lost to current and time. She had built closure out of silence, out of the painful acceptance of a tragedy. And now, sitting there in the shadows of her own cellar, with undeniable evidence in her lap and silence all around her, one thing was suddenly brutally clear. Arthur hadn't vanished. He had hidden. And she was finally going to find out why. She picked up another photo. Arthur, younger, with a toddler on his shoulders, both laughing. The child had his chin, his thick, dark hair. Eleanor wasn't just erased. She had been replaced. But instead of letting that hollow her out again, a strange cold calm began to wash over her, because now she knew. She hadn't failed him. He hadn't been broken. He hadn't disappeared into thin air or fallen prey to depression or tragedy. He had chosen to walk away, chosen another life, chosen to let her believe he was dead rather than offer her the dignity of a goodbye. And that choice, she realized, no longer had power over her. She began to see things differently. Not just about him, but about herself. She had spent 2 decades dimming her own light, convinced she had somehow driven him away. She had become small, quiet, cautious. She had built a life out of silence, walking carefully through each day like it might crack under her feet. But now she realized she was never the one who needed fixing. Arthur had been cowardly, dishonest, weak, and she was still here. She was still standing. That realization came with an unexpected quiet strength. The box sat on Eleanor's dining table for 3 days. She didn't touch it again right away. She couldn't. Every time she passed it, she felt like it was pulsing, like the truth inside it was breathing, waiting. She wasn't ready to open it again, but she also couldn't bring herself to put it away. It stayed there, a raw wound she couldn't bandage, a wound that refused to close. The first night after finding it, Eleanor didn't sleep. She lay awake with the bedroom light on, her body curled toward the empty side of the bed. She kept expecting to feel anger, sharp, loud, blistering fury. But it didn't come. What she felt instead was grief, deeper than she thought possible. Not grief for Arthur, not anymore, but for the version of herself that had loved him. The woman who had waited, begged, mourned. The woman who had questioned her worth every day for 20 years, wondering if she had done something wrong. She had been loyal to a ghost, and worse, to a lie. And now, sitting with that box of proof, the spell finally broke. Something inside her shifted, not like lightning, more like a slow, rolling quake. It was quiet, but it was permanent. The next morning, Eleanor woke up and didn't cry. She got dressed, not in her usual sweats, but a pair of jeans and a crisp, light blue shirt she hadn't worn in years. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked tired, yes. But there was something else under the surface, a new steadiness she hadn't seen in decades. She poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat at the dining table, and finally opened the box again. This time, she didn't flinch. She studied every document, letters from a bank account she didn't know existed, a lease agreement from Minneapolis, signed with a name that wasn't quite his, A.J. Vance. Pictures of birthday parties with children that looked too much like Arthur to deny. One photograph caught her breath. him holding a toddler in his arms, smiling broadly. The child had his chin, his dark, wavy hair. She wasn't just erased, she had been replaced. But instead of letting that hollow her out again, Eleanor felt a strange calm wash over her, because now she knew. She hadn't failed him, he hadn't been broken. He hadn't disappeared into thin air or fallen prey to depression or tragedy. He had chosen to walk away, chosen another life, chosen to let her believe he was dead rather than offer her the dignity of a goodbye. And that choice no longer had power over her. She began to see things differently, not just about him, but about herself. She had spent 2 decades dimming her own light, convinced she had somehow driven him away. She had become small, quiet, cautious. She had built a life out of silence, walking carefully through each day, like it might crack under her. But now she realized she was never the one who needed fixing. Arthur had been cowardly, dishonest, weak, and she was still here. She was still standing. That realization came with unexpected strength. Eleanor stood up from the dining table, walked to the hallway closet, and grabbed the box of things Arthur had packed away all those years ago. Her old raincoat, the scarf Chloe had knit her, the gardening gloves he once said made her look like someone who belonged in a novel. She unpacked them. She hung the coat on the hook by the door. She wrapped the scarf around her neck and went for a walk. The air outside felt different, sharper, like it had been waiting for her. She walked past the hedges she hadn't trimmed in years, the mailbox she'd neglected, the neighbors she'd avoided. She nodded at the Davises across the street. They stared for a second, surprised, then waved back. She kept walking down the block, around the corner, toward the little coffee shop Arthur and she used to visit every Saturday. She didn't go in, not yet, but she stood outside and stared at her reflection in the window. And for the first time in years, she saw a woman coming back to life. Not because of Arthur, but in spite of him. Eleanor didn't tell anyone what she'd found. Not Chloe, not the neighbors, not even the women at the book club she'd recently started attending again. From the outside, she was still the quiet widow with a predictable routine. Tea at 7, gardening at 10, grocery shopping every Thursday. But inside, something had awakened, and she wasn't putting it back to sleep. She began quietly preparing, not out of revenge, not even out of bitterness. She wasn't interested in a dramatic confrontation or lighting his new life on fire. What she wanted was truth and control. She had spent 20 years floating in a fog someone else left her in. Now she was building a path back to solid ground, one silent step at a time. First, she made copies. Every photo, every document, every piece of Arthur's hidden life she'd found in the cellar was scanned and saved to a USB drive. She labeled the folder "House Repairs" in case anyone ever glanced at her computer. Then she printed a second set and stored it in a locked drawer in the guest room. The one Arthur never liked, the one with the creaky floorboard and the view of the alley. Next, she hired a private investigator, not one of those TV types in trench coats and sunglasses, just a quiet, sharp woman named Ms. Anya Sharma, who operated out of a modest office downtown. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, just nodded as Eleanor handed her the folder of fake IDs, bank records, and rental agreements, and said, "I believe my husband is alive. I'd like to know where he is and what name he's using." Ms. Sharma's only response, "You'll have it in 10 days. That night, Eleanor slept more soundly than she had in years. During the days that followed, Eleanor made subtle changes. She met with a lawyer, Mr. Julian Thorne, a calm, precise man. She told him she was reviewing old documents just in case. They talked about wills, property rights, and the very specific implications of a spouse faking their death. She didn't say Arthur's name, but she saw the flicker in the attorney's eyes when she hinted at long-term fraud. He gave her a number for a colleague who specialized in family law and said, "When you're ready, call her." Eleanor nodded. At home, she cleaned the cellar, really cleaned it. She organized boxes, donated what she didn't need, and packed Arthur's old clothes into trash bags without flinching. She found more clues along the way: bank slips stuffed inside old books, a note scrawled on a napkin in a language she couldn't understand. She kept everything, cataloged it, filed it away like evidence in a case she was building quietly, methodically, without a word. Eleanor also began writing again. Not stories, not yet, but thoughts, memories, small pieces of truth she hadn't allowed herself to speak aloud. She filled 3 journals in the span of a month. Some entries were only a paragraph. Others were 10 pages of raw emotion. She didn't hold back. I waited for you. You made me question my worth. You will not define me. That last one she wrote twice. And as she wrote, she changed. As Eleanor wrote, she changed. She started dressing with purpose again, not for anyone else, but for herself. She bought fresh flowers for the dining table every week. She cooked full meals, even if she ate them alone. She opened the curtains wider, letting the sun stream back into every room. The house no longer felt haunted. The memories of Arthur still lived there, sure, but they no longer ruled the space. She walked the halls as someone reclaiming what had always been hers. Even Chloe noticed. On one of their weekly calls, her daughter said, "You sound lighter, Mom." Eleanor smiled. "Maybe I am," she replied. Chloe didn't press. She never did. But Eleanor could hear the relief in her daughter's voice. 10 days later, just as Ms. Anya Sharma had promised, the phone rang. Eleanor answered, her hand steady. "Ms. Vance." Ms. Sharma's voice was crisp, professional. "I have the information you requested." Eleanor's heart gave a single firm beat. "Go ahead," she said, pulling a notepad closer. Ms. Sharma provided an address, a name, and then the detail that made Eleanor's breath catch: a photo. "He's living in Minneapolis, Minnesota," Ms. Sharma explained. "Goes by Adam Vance. He's in a 2-story colonial house with a new wife, 2 children, and a black Labrador named Tank." A moment later, an email arrived with the attached image. Eleanor opened it. There he was, Arthur, or rather, Adam. He was standing in the front yard of a neat suburban house, a wide, easy smile on his face. He was older, a little heavier, a little grayer around the temples, but it was undeniably him. The same tired eyes, the same slight crookedness to his smile. He looked utterly normal, like he had never shattered someone's life, like he had never driven to the edge of a river and abandoned his past without a single word of closure. Eleanor didn't feel rage. She didn't even feel shock. What she felt was a quiet certainty. She simply sat there, staring at the photo, the truth documented and undeniable. She now held the complete picture of his new life, a life built on a foundation of lies. He had no idea that his carefully constructed world, his quiet suburban existence, was about to be exposed. She simply slid the photo into a folder on her computer and stood up straighter than she had in years. Something had shifted, and this time, it wasn't just inside her, it was inside him. He just didn't know it yet. For 2 decades, Arthur had been the one holding the pen to the story of their marriage. He chose the ending. He closed the door. He wrote Eleanor out. But now, she held the truth in her hands, documented, verified, undeniable. And she knew something he didn't. He wasn't untouchable anymore. Eleanor didn't need to scream to reclaim her dignity. She didn't need to destroy his life to repair hers. All she needed was clarity. And now she had it. Eleanor began taking small, deliberate steps. The first call she made was to Mr. Julian Thorne, her lawyer. She updated her will, carefully removing Arthur's name and any reference to him as next of kin. She drafted a formal statement of abandonment, a legal document that acknowledged his disappearance and her long-standing limbo. She then initiated legal proceedings to declare him legally alive. This wasn't about revenge, she explained to Mr. Thorne, but about clarity. She wanted to untangle herself from the legal fog of a missing spouse that had clung to her for years. Arthur thought she was still standing in that fog, but she wasn't. She was on solid ground, and the ground beneath him was about to get shaky. Meanwhile, Eleanor went about her days as usual. She baked muffins for the church bake sale. She helped Chloe pick out baby shower gifts for her best friend. She smiled at the cashier at the market. No one suspected that anything had changed, but everything had changed. One afternoon, Eleanor visited the bank, where she and Arthur used to have a joint account. She calmly presented the documentation she'd gathered, evidence that he was alive, proof of his false identity, the fact that he had never legally divorced her. The banker looked stunned, but remained professional. She thanked Eleanor for the records and told her they'd forward the case to their fraud department. Eleanor walked out feeling taller, not victorious, just certain. She didn't need revenge. What she wanted was truth to live where lies had taken root. Inside, a quiet revolution was underway. The final straw came through Chloe, though she didn't know it. One evening, Eleanor was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters after baking a batch of lemon shortbread, the kind Arthur used to love but never truly thanked her for. These days, she baked them for herself, no longer trying to please a ghost. Her phone buzzed. Chloe's name lit up the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," Eleanor said, pressing the phone to her ear. Chloe's voice was unusually soft. "Hi, Mom. You busy?" "Just finished baking," Eleanor replied, sensing something in her tone. "What's going on?" Chloe hesitated for a second, then said it. "I got an email from someone named Adam Vance. He said he used to know Dad." Time didn't stop, not really, but something inside Eleanor did. She turned off the sink faucet, wiped her hands on a towel, and sat at the kitchen table. "An email?" she asked gently, trying to keep her voice even. "Yeah, just a couple of lines, really," Chloe explained. "He said he came across my name and wanted to check in. Weird, right?" Eleanor's mind raced. She immediately recognized Arthur's subtle writing style, the awkward warmth, the slightly formal phrasing. He was trying to circle back. Maybe curiosity had gotten the better of him, maybe guilt, or maybe he'd sensed something in the air, a tremor in the foundation of the secret life he'd built. "Can you forward me the email, honey?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm. "Sure, Mom," Chloe said, sounding relieved to pass on the strange encounter. When Eleanor read it, the tone, the language, it was all Arthur. He had the audacity to reach out after everything. It didn't surprise her, but it still twisted something inside her. She didn't tell Chloe the full truth, yet. Not yet. Instead, Eleanor sat down at her desk. She took out a plain white envelope and a piece of paper. She typed a message, carefully, precisely. No return address, just a few lines of text. "I found the box. I know everything. Don't contact Chloe again. You may have left me, but I finally left you. No threats, no pleas, just clarity." She folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope, and sealed it. She imagined him opening it, the panic, the recognition that the woman he once erased now stood outside the reach of his silence. And for the first time, he would be the one wondering what came next. The balance had shifted, not with a bang, but with a truth that could no longer be buried. It wasn't rage that brought Eleanor to that bench in the park. It wasn't revenge or spite or even curiosity. It was closure, a word she used to roll her eyes at, but now understood with a kind of sacred clarity. She didn't want to yell at Arthur. She didn't want to slap him or demand an explanation she knew he could never truly give. She just wanted him to see her, the real her, the woman he tried to erase. After Eleanor sent the letter, "I found the box. I know everything." He waited 6 days before reaching out. An email, plain and simple, no subject line, just 3 lines of text. "Please let me explain. I never meant to hurt you. Can we meet?" Eleanor stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed back, 1 hour. "Willow Creek Park, Saturday, noon." No more. She chose the location carefully. Not their home, not somewhere with shared memories. She picked a neutral place, open and public, but quiet enough for the truth to settle in. The park was halfway between where she lived and where Ms. Sharma had said he was living now in Minneapolis. She doubted he'd tell his new wife he was meeting Eleanor. That was fine. Eleanor wasn't there to disrupt. She was there to finish. She arrived early. The trees were bare, their branches stark against a gray spring sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. Eleanor sat on the far end of a bench near the creek, where the path curved just enough that she could watch people come without being seen first. And then he appeared, Arthur, or Adam, as he now called himself. He walked slowly, like someone approaching a crime scene. He looked older than in the photo, thinner. His hair had gone mostly white. He wore a blue jacket and carried a folded piece of paper in his hand, probably something rehearsed, something practiced. He spotted Eleanor and froze. She didn't move. After a moment, he walked over and sat, not too close. There was a space between them, the kind that used to be filled with warmth. Now it was cold, dense, with everything unspoken. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Eleanor didn't help him. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know how to begin." Eleanor turned to look at him fully, for the first time in 20 years. His eyes were the same, soft, cowardly. "There's nothing you could say that would undo it," she said quietly, her voice steady. "But go ahead, try." He swallowed hard. I was drowning back then. I felt like I didn't matter, like I was just going through the motions. Every day felt the same. I didn't know how to tell you. And then I met someone. It wasn't planned. It just happened. And I thought if I stayed, I'd end up resenting you, hurting you worse. You did hurt me worse, Eleanor replied, her voice unwavering. You let me think you were dead. You watched me bury an empty coffin. You watched our daughter cry for a man who didn't even have the courage to say goodbye. He flinched. I thought it would be kinder. Don't, Eleanor said sharply. Don't pretend this was mercy. It was selfishness, disguised as a disappearing act. He stared at the creek, his gaze fixed, ashamed. I didn't contact Chloe again, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I promise. I'm not here to reconcile, Arthur. Eleanor looked at him again, truly looked. I'm here because I want you to see what you tried to bury. She leaned in slightly, not with anger, but with gravity. I lived with your ghost for 20 years. I questioned everything, who I was, what I did wrong, whether I'd imagined it all. I held a funeral for a man who chose to vanish rather than be honest. But I've stopped mourning. I've stopped wondering. I am not your wife. I am not your victim. I am me. And I came here so you would know I remember everything and that I am no longer afraid. Arthur said nothing. His hands trembled slightly in his lap. The wind stirred the leaves around their feet. Is that all? Eleanor asked, after a moment. He nodded slowly. Yes. Eleanor stood, adjusted her scarf, and looked down at the man who used to be her world, and now looked so painfully small. I forgive you, she said. But I'll never forget. Then she walked away. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with purpose. And she didn't look back. Eleanor didn't expect anything more from Arthur after that final conversation in the park. She'd said what she came to say, looked him in the eye, and left without a trace of regret. She thought that was the end, closure. But fate, as it often does, had one last twist in store. Not loud or cinematic, but poetic and just sharp enough to taste like justice. 2 weeks later, Eleanor got a call from her lawyer, Mr. Julian Thorne. He spoke with his usual precision. Eleanor, he said, you need to come in. We've received documents related to Mr. Vance's second marriage, or, as I should say now, illegitimate marriage. Eleanor sat in his office later that week, the same manila folder resting between them that she had given him months earlier, now fattened with legal findings and signatures. He never filed for divorce, Mr. Thorne said, flipping through the pages. In the eyes of the state, you're still his legal wife. Eleanor stared at him. So, he committed bigamy? Yes, Mr. Thorne confirmed. And not only that, he opened several joint financial accounts under a false identity while still legally married to you. which could be considered fraud, tax fraud, identity misrepresentation, possibly even insurance fraud, depending on what claims were made under his death. Eleanor's first instinct was disbelief. After all the pain, the silence, the abandonment, he had been the one breaking the law all along. "Do you want to press charges?" Mr. Thorne asked. Eleanor paused. The thought of courtroom drama, of dragging his second family through the mud, made her stomach turn. She didn't want to punish innocent people. She didn't want to become the monster he feared enough to fake his own disappearance. "No," she said. "I don't want a trial. I want a statement, and I want him to lose the right to keep living this lie." Mr. Thorne nodded. "Then we can file a civil petition. You'd be within your rights to void his second marriage, reclaim property, and submit a formal record that invalidates any legal claims he's made under false pretense." 2 weeks later, Arthur, or rather Adam, received formal notice. The petition stripped his second marriage of legal status. His bank accounts were flagged for review. His name entered a fraud registry. Quietly, carefully, without fanfare, the life he built on the bones of Eleanor's grief began to unravel. But that wasn't the part that felt like justice. That came later. The true justice came the day Eleanor got a letter in the mail. Not from Arthur, but from her. Brenda Vance. The woman he'd married under false pretenses. The woman who for nearly 20 years had lived the life Eleanor thought she'd lost. The letter was handwritten, cautious, respectful. It began like this: "I don't know you, but I owe you an apology." Brenda explained how Arthur had confessed everything to her after receiving the legal notice. She had been devastated, not just by the lie, but by the decades of betrayal, by the way he had disappeared from an entire life and let another woman carry the weight of his absence. She said she found the files he kept hidden, the notes Eleanor had uncovered years later. She had confronted him, and he had finally admitted the full truth. Brenda wrote, "I married a man I didn't truly know, and you lived a life wondering where he went. I am sorry for my part in that, even if it was unknowing. I want you to know he's gone now. I've asked him to leave. The children and I will be rebuilding, just like you did. I hope one day your story brings you peace." Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Each time, the weight in her chest lifted a little more. He had lost everything, not because Eleanor demanded it, but because lies don't stay buried, even when hidden behind new names, new smiles, new zip codes. Eleanor never spoke to him again. She didn't need to. He had been exposed, not with violence, not with scandal, but with quiet, undeniable truth. That was the justice she never knew she needed. Because the real power wasn't in what she took from him. It was in what she reclaimed for herself. It was a rainy Wednesday when Chloe called. Eleanor was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters after baking a batch of lemon shortbread, the kind Arthur used to love but never truly thanked her for. These days, she baked them for herself, no longer trying to please a ghost. Her phone buzzed. Chloe's name lit up the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," Eleanor said, pressing it to her ear. Chloe's voice was unusually soft. "Hi, Mom. You busy?" "Just finished baking," Eleanor replied, sensing something in her tone. "What's going on?" Chloe hesitated for a second, then said it. "I got a letter from Dad." Eleanor's grip tightened on the dish towel. A letter. She turned off the sink faucet, wiped her hands, and sat at the kitchen table. "A letter?" she asked gently. "Yeah, just a couple pages, handwritten. No return address," Chloe explained. "He said he'd been following my life from afar, and that he hoped someday I'd forgive him. He said he never stopped loving me." Eleanor closed her eyes. The fact that he had the audacity to reach out after everything didn't surprise her, but it still hurt. "What did you think?" Eleanor asked carefully. Chloe sighed. "I didn't reply. I don't think I will. Honestly, I'm just confused. He wants forgiveness, but not a relationship. He says he's sorry, but never really explains why he left." "That sounds about right," Eleanor said softly. There was silence on the line. Then Chloe said something Eleanor hadn't expected. "Did you ever think he'd come back?" Eleanor thought about that, not in terms of hope, that had died a long time ago, but in terms of expectation, whether she ever truly believed Arthur would one day appear, knock on the door, and say he'd made a mistake. "I used to," Eleanor admitted. "For a long time, I used to imagine the doorbell ringing, him standing there with tears and apologies, and some story about losing his mind or needing to start over. I wrote entire conversations in my head that never happened." "Then what changed?" Chloe asked. "Then I realized I didn't actually want him to come back," Eleanor said. "Why not?" Chloe asked, her voice quiet. "Because I finally started liking the woman I was becoming without him." Chloe was quiet again. Eleanor could hear the weight of that statement settling over her daughter. "I always wondered what you weren't telling me," Chloe said. "When I was younger, I thought maybe it was too painful for you to talk about. But I think I get it now. You were protecting me from the ugly truth." Eleanor nodded, even though Chloe couldn't see her. "I didn't want you to carry his absence like a burden. I wanted you to live your life freely, not chasing a shadow or resenting him. He made his choice. I didn't want it to steal your joy too." Chloe's voice cracked a little. "You never said anything bad about him." "I know," Eleanor said, "but that doesn't mean I thought good things." Chloe gave a half laugh. "You're stronger than I ever realized, Mom." "No," Eleanor said. "I'm just no longer afraid of the truth." They talked for another hour, not about Arthur, but about Chloe's work, her dog, her latest book club drama. Just mother and daughter, comfortable and whole. After they hung up, Eleanor went out to the garden. The rain had stopped, leaving everything glistening and new. She walked slowly between the rows of lavender and rosemary, breathing in the wet earth. She didn't need Chloe to choose sides. She didn't need her to hate her father or even confront him. What mattered was that Chloe saw her now, not as someone fragile or tragic, but as someone who had walked through fire and come out clean on the other side. Later that evening, Eleanor lit a candle in the living room, poured a glass of wine, and read a letter she had written but never sent. It was to Arthur. She had written it months ago after finding the box. It ended with one line: "You disappeared, but I didn't." And it was true. He had vanished from their lives, but she had remained. She had grown. And now, finally, her daughter saw her, not as someone who was left, but someone who had risen. A year had passed since that birthday card slid under her door, changing everything. The seasons had come and gone, each one peeling back another layer of who Eleanor used to be. And now, standing once again at the top of the cellar stairs, she no longer felt fear. She flipped on the light. It flickered once, before humming to life. She hadn't come down here much since finding the hidden box, only when she needed something from storage, or to clear out the last remnants of Arthur's carefully staged vanishing act. But tonight felt different. It wasn't an errand. It was a closing. Eleanor walked down slowly, her steps steady. The space was clean now, cleared of cobwebs and clutter. The musty scent had faded, replaced by lavender sachets and fresh paint. She had repurposed the far corner, the one with the false wall, into a small reading nook, an old armchair, a soft lamp, a woven rug. Nothing elaborate, but it was hers. She sat in the chair and looked around. Her fingers curled around a cup of peppermint tea. A soft rain tapped on the small window near the ceiling. The same window she used to avoid looking at, afraid it might reflect the face of someone who disappeared. Not anymore. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who stood in this very space, with shaking hands and a box full of betrayal in her lap. She had lived in mourning, not just for a man, but for an entire version of her life that never truly existed. And Eleanor mourned for her, not with sadness, but with respect, because she survived what could have hollowed her out completely. She didn't just endure the silence, she built a new voice inside it. Eleanor used to think closure meant answers, a confession, a perfect full-circle ending. But now she knew better. Closure is a choice. It's walking through the same door that once broke you and realizing it no longer holds any power. She had spent years living in half-light, tiptoeing around grief, waiting for something that would never return. Arthur had written his own exit, thinking he could leave without consequence. But the truth has a way of surfacing. Not always with drama, but with certainty. And once it arrives, it doesn't leave room for shame or denial. It just is. Eleanor no longer carried questions like chains. Where did he go? Why did he leave? What did I do wrong? Those questions had once been her companions. Now they were ghosts that didn't know they were dead. She thought about Chloe's voice on the phone that day, filled with cautious concern, then quiet admiration. How Chloe had seen her fully for the first time. Not just as mom, the constant, the comforter, the one who kept everything stitched together, but as a woman who had lost, broken, rebuilt, and kept going. That was what mattered in the end. Not the fall, but the getting up. Eleanor looked around the cellar once more, at the boxes, now labeled clearly, at the shelves that held pieces of her past, but no longer defined her, at the soft glow of the lamp, casting light into the corners where darkness used to settle. And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the card, the one that started it all. It was creased now, the edges worn from being opened and shut too many times. She held it for a moment, then stood and walked to the small electric fireplace she had installed last fall, just enough to warm the room. She turned it on, watched the soft flames flicker, and she placed the card into the fire. It curled quickly, blackened at the edges. The words, "I never truly left. Check the old cellar," disappeared into smoke and ash. He was right in a way. He never really left because Eleanor carried the wound of his absence for years. But now she was choosing to let him go. Not for him, for her. The ashes drifted upward and vanished. She smiled. Then she walked up the stairs, flipped off the light, and closed the door behind her. Not because she was afraid of what was down there, but because she had finally brought the light with her, and she no longer needed to look. If you found Eleanor's journey inspiring, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and healing.